Hey crew, Coach Josh here with GarageGangGyms.com, and today we're going to talk about the RDL. And before I go any further, this video is time-stamped because we're going to cover a lot that goes on with the RDL. First, we're going to cover how to brace, then the hinge, how to add dumbbells, then a barbell, then how to make using a barbell even harder. So if you're here to see how to make it harder with a barbell, skip right ahead. If you already know how to brace, skip past this, okay? It's all time-stamped in the description below. So RDL, we are trying to use our hamstrings, our glutes, and somewhat of our lower back to bend us over and stand us back up. That's really what we're trying to achieve. And again, we need to make sure our midsection is as braced as possible. That way we can lift maximally and feel our hamstrings the most. We need to make sure we understand how to hinge and what's actually happening at the knees and the hips. Then from there, how to start using weights in our hands. Like I said, we're going to be talking about using dumbbells. Then how to progress to a barbell. And then from there, how to progress even further. And at the end, we'll talk about some ways to actually make all of this just a little bit easier with things like straps, belts, other things like that. So let's dive in. All right, so with the RDL, we are trying to do a hinging pattern. We're trying to get our hamstrings to stretch, and once we're bent over, they're stretched, they come together, our glutes help raise our chest at the top. But before we start bending over, it's really important you guys understand how to brace your core, what you need to do to pressurize your midsection so that as we bend over, you're only using your lower back as much as necessary. You will use your lower back in an RDL, but again, only as much as necessary. And my favorite cue for bracing, especially when you're bending over, is one that you can actually visualize yourself doing. So what works for me is imagining I have a party balloon. So with a party balloon, as you're blowing it up, you take a big breath, you go, and it gets a little bigger, and then gets a little bigger. What I want you to think about is you have that party balloon, you're going to take that big breath, but as you try to exhale, you just keep your mouth closed. So it'll look like this. Now, you don't need to puff your cheeks per se, but I want you to really focus on the sensation you got in your belly. Now, this isn't the full brace picture, but it is really going to help put some tension into your core so that as we're bending over and we're talking about what your shoulders are doing and other things like that, we can trap that air a little bit better in your abdomen. So again, imagine it's a balloon. In my mind, I have a yellow balloon dangling from my mouth. I have this balloon expanded, and I'm just trying to prevent that balloon from coming in on me. So I take that breath, and then I get a good amount of pressure in my abdomen. Okay, so this hinge. What we're trying to do with our hamstrings, so they have two jobs. One is to stabilize or move the hip. Another is to stabilize or move the knee. And with the RDL, we're trying to do both. So in our hinge, we are going to have our knees slightly bent. This is not a stiff-legged deadlift. Some people confuse stiff-legged deadlifts and RDLs. I like to split those up. Stiff-legged, your knees are locked out, and your primary focus is to hit from the middle of your hamstring up through your glute. With the RDL, you're trying to hit the whole hamstring and some glute. Most people can do more weight on the RDL. So again, we want to have a little bit of a bend in our knees, and all we have to do in order to achieve that is just, again, slightly bend in your knees. Now, our goal is to get, again, the maximal amount of stretch. So as I bend over, I need to use my hamstrings to keep my knee in place in this little bit of a bent position while my glutes go back and I tip over. Because what that's going to do is it's going to lock my hamstring in here. It's going to stretch it. And then as I pivot over, I'm going to get more glute action. My hamstrings are going to come towards each other as I stand up, and then I'll finish my RDL. So again, slight bend, and all we're trying to think about are our hamstrings. And what can really help turn them on before we go is the cue of taking your feet and trying to slide them behind you. So I honestly want you to try that. Take one of your feet, put it in front of you, and try to slide it back. Now, when we're doing the RDL, our feet are obviously not moving, but having that cue in your mind of you trying to take your feet and slide them back, you're going to activate your hamstrings quite a bit. And this is going to give you something to really focus on. So again, my knees are slightly bent. I am pulling my feet behind me. I'm going to take that balloon breath, and then I'm going to tip over at the hips. Again, I'm trying to take my hips and move them up and away from my knees without my knees moving too much. They can start to come back as I get lower, but I'm trying to really keep that tension in my hamstrings and then I'll stand back up. So slowing it down a little bit, I'm gonna bend, I'm hooking my feet, I'm tipping over, keeping that tension in my hamstrings. The tendency for people is their first instinct is they bend and then they kick their butt way back. Now you will feel a little bit of a stretching sensation in your hamstrings, but the problem with that is you did that by using your lower back to really tilt it out, and then you're gonna come way back here off of your toes. What we wanna do is actually keep our hips in the same place. And again, that cue of pulling your feet back, that's gonna really make sure your glutes are on. It keeps your hips, it keeps your core in a neutral position as I'm tipping over, as my glutes are stretching, not my lower back. My lower back's virtually off as I'm tipping over and getting a good hamstring stretch. Now, if you guys are struggling to feel your hamstrings right now, something you guys could play with is your stance. If your feet are really wide, which a lot of people will start with a nice wide stance, you're only gonna feel the outsides of your hamstring. So play around with this. Bring your feet a little bit closer. When I was first learning to get my RDLs right, I only had about a fist distance between my feet. Now this puts a little bit of different strains around, but you're definitely gonna feel those hamstrings as you're kicking over. So again, I'm hooking my feet into the ground. I feel good hamstring engagement. I take that balloon breath. My knees are soft. As I bend over, my hips are gonna tilt up. My knees will shift back just slightly, but as much as my knees come back, my hips are going back as well. Because again, if just my knees go and my hips don't, there isn't as much stretch as there could be. I'm hooking the floor, tipping over. I feel a ton of stretching going on. I'm gonna go until I can't go any further, can't get any more stretch. And then from there, what I'm gonna do is as I push my feet into the floor, I'm gonna bring my hips forward. So I'm lightly pushing down through the ground, and for every inch I push down, or for every inch it makes me rise up, I'm gonna bring my hips forward. Now at the top, the tendency for people is as they're coming up is to arch in their lower back in order to bring their shoulders up. What we want is our glutes, they will make our shoulders rise if we're using them correctly. Instead of thinking about thrusting your hips forward, that a lot of people tend to do, I like to think about as I'm straightening my legs, I'm also trying to create distance from my upper body and my lower body through the hip. So this distance will give my glutes a spot to wedge themselves in. Again, a lot of people try to take their glutes and just force it through this little gap. Again, we're trying to create as much of a gap from our upper body and our lower body so that our glutes can come through and they come to a full lock. So once you guys have figured out how to use your glutes, how to keep your core solid, how to find your hamstrings, you can bend over and come up 10 to 15 times without feeling a whole lot of lower back. It's time to add some weight. But before we do that, if you're feeling your lower back, chances are on the way up, you're losing your core pressure, or again, you're trying to lead with your chest. And you can see how in my lower back, as I lead with my chest, there's just this big arch and there's no movement of my legs. And then from here, I try to bring my hips forward. And that's just pumping up your lower back. Sometimes when you feel your lower back, it doesn't actually mean it's a dangerous thing, but it means that you're using your lower back. And yes, we do use our lower back a little bit in the RDL, but it's not our primary mover. It works synergistically with our glutes and our hamstrings, right? Our lower back, glutes, hamstrings, our posterior chain. So let's talk dumbbells. Okay, so dumbbells. It's the exact same hinging pattern as we were just talking about, except now our upper body has something to do. So we've worked on our brace, we've worked on our basic hinge. Now our arms, shoulders, and lats have a job to do. The tendency when we have weights in our hands is just to let our arms dangle. But you can see how my posture, my upper body just kind of rounded over, and that's what your body wants to do. So what we need to think about is trying to take our neck and make it as long as possible. So I'm gonna get in real close here. I'm trying to take my neck without tilting my head back, and I'm trying to make my neck as long as possible. By trying to extend through my neck, what happens is my shoulders are gonna come down, my shoulder blades will go towards my hips, and that's gonna lock in my lats, especially my lower lats, allowing me to hold on to this weight. Now, as I said in the bracing before, and again, if you skipped that and you don't know what I'm talking about, you can certainly go back. This video is timestamped. When we have that brace, we're going to gain some pressure from above with this, and it's going to help us trap that air even better than just the balloon cue we talked about. We still are going to apply the same balloon cue, but again, we're trying to lengthen our neck as much as possible without tilting, right? I'm not shoving my chin back either. It's just I'm lengthening my neck, and you'll feel right around your lower floating ribs, you're going to feel a cinching sensation. That's going to help you lock in this weight into your body. So, same hinge, I'm lengthening my neck, right? Nice long neck. I take that breath, and as I tip, if you can see, I have the dumbbells turned, somewhat of a triangle. That way the handles actually sit up against my legs, and it actually lets me keep the weights closer to my hips. And that's going to give me a little bit better of a time learning this with weight. When we get to the bar being out in front of us actually makes it harder on our glutes, which can be a great thing. But when you're first learning, maybe not so much. So I'm hooking my feet like we talked about. I'm taking that breath. I'm going to lengthen my neck, and I'm going to do everything the same. Take a breath. Nice and slow on the way down. And controlled on the way up. Now, with the weights, any issues you were having with the basic hinge are just going to get exacerbated more. If you were having issues, oh, I feel my lower back, the weights are going to make you more likely to use your lower back, especially when you're in that bent over position, because it's so uncomfortable. This is where our body is its most stretched. It doesn't feel very good. So our body wants to get out of this position. Two ways it's going to happen. Number one, you're going to try to breathe out. If you breathe out when you're down here, you just changed all the pressures in your core. Now you're really going to use your lower back. So it's really important with weight, we hold our breath while we're moving. Second thing is, again, because you're uncomfortable, you have all this load in your hamstrings because they're tight and your body just desperately wants to stick its ass out, but you're keeping it underneath, not poopy dog syndrome, but you're keeping it neutral. You have all this tension. Your body wants desperately to get rid of that tension, so it lifts your chest up first and takes that tension away from your hamstrings and puts it into your lower back. You need to be diligent about being patient, letting the legs do the work. We bend, we tip, we let the legs do the work. Nice long neck as I stand up. Now, with these dumbbells, as you go forward, they're going to have a tendency to want to walk away from you. And if that's happening, two things. Number one, you got to make sure you're having that nice long neck, because that's going to help trap the weights at least a lot closer to your body. But the second thing is imagining we're taking those dumbbells and actually trying to bring them behind us. The tendency, though, in people is when they're doing that, is as they're trying to bring the weight behind them, they'll let their shoulders kick out, which is also a really good reason to have that longer neck cue. Because if you're trying to have a long neck and pull your arms back, your shoulders cannot come forward. So we're pulling our dumbbells behind us, nice long neck, everything stays nice and tight for us to do the RDL. So I'll show you that again. Hooking my feet, long neck, big breath, holding that balloon, trying to bring the dumbbells behind me and coming up. Now, once you've mastered that, and by master, I mean you have some pretty heavy dumbbells in your hands. For guys, we're talking 35, 40 pound dumbbells. For ladies, 25, 30 pounds. Once you've exceeded the empty barbell's weight with dumbbells, now's the perfect time to move on to the barbell. Number one, the barbell is going to be a lot easier because number one, it's going to be lighter than the weights you were using already. But number two, because it's one object instead of two, it's a lot easier for us to hold. Our body can kind of interpret one object a little bit better than two individual objects. And our grip is going to be a little bit better because typically there's knurling on a bar. And the barbell is so great because we're going to be able to add more weight than we would realistically be able to hold with dumbbells. That doesn't say you shouldn't do RDLs with dumbbells, especially when we're talking single leg RDLs. That can be a really powerful tool. But let's move on to the barbell so that we can put a little more weight on the bar. Okay, so using a barbell, we want to treat this exactly the same as we were just treating those dumbbells. So what did we do? We hooked our feet. We tried to bring the dumbbells behind us. The bar is going to get in the way now. It's going to stay up against my leg pretty much the whole time. I'm going to have a nice long neck, take that balloon breath, and then I'm going to tip over. Now, all the way down my thigh, I'm going to keep the bar on me. As I pass the knee and my knees shift back slightly, so that I can tip over, there's going to be about a 1/2 inch space between me and my leg. There's no need to grind your shins up on this. We just need to keep it really close. So again, I'm still trying to pull that bar back. Nice long neck, bend, my knees shift back slightly. I'm pulling my feet behind me. I'm talking to you right now, but you'd be holding your breath. I get to my maximal stretch so that I don't start arching or rounding in my back. And then as I push up, the tendency is for our arms to dangle. So again, we need to think about keeping that bar in nice and close. And I'll turn sideways so you can really see this. I tip over. Again, the tendency is as I come up, it drifts. That's all lower back. We don't like that. Long neck, bar stays coming back toward me. Now, the one negative to using a barbell versus dumbbells is typically when you start putting plates on a bar, especially full size plates, whether you're using bumper plates or full 45-pound plates, people's flexibility tend to be able to do better than the distance they can travel with a bar. So I'll show you that first, and then I'll show you a way that we can actually make it a little bit harder. Now, if this is your first time using plates, and this is the first time using a bar, even if you have the flexibility to continue on, I highly recommend for at least a few workouts, you stick to just the floor being your depth. The reason I say that is you still are going to be building quite a bit of tolerance in your body for the most part, and you can build the brace, the breath. What are my arms doing? You can build other parts of the technique rather than trying to maximize your range of motion your first time exposed to the RDL. But when we put these weights on, I'll show you a couple ways to make it a little harder, even if you feel you can go a little bit lower. Every time we take it from the floor, we want to deadlift this the best we possibly can. Even though it's not an RDL, we're not RDLing it off the floor. If you're doing it out of a rack, that's perfectly fine too. Maybe it's a little lower, you back up, perfectly fine. It's very important that you're safe when you're picking it up. So many people will just grab this bar and just yank it any which way that they want. And that's usually what ends up them getting hurt, not the actual exercise itself. If you guys don't know how to do a full deadlift from the floor, stay tuned because next week's video is a deep dive in the deadlift from the floor. But anyway, some of the things that you might run into, like I said, is actually being more flexible than the range of motion you're able to do with the floor. So we'll deadlift this. Okay, same rules apply. I'm going to take my breath. I'm going to bend my knees, hooking my feet. Nice long neck. Down. And I can touch the floor. So, ways to make it harder. You can certainly go heavier, but when the floor is getting in the way, as soon as that weight settles on the floor, there's a lot of unloading in your body that actually happens. There's still quite a bit of tension, but some of that weight gets distributed into the floor. And then you have to kind of pull it off the floor when you're not quite fully ready to pull it off the floor, because again, some of that weight is taken away from you. So what I'd highly recommend is instead of just thinking, hey, let's just go heavier, 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 actually taking it a little slower. Going slower on RDLs for your hamstrings can be a great way to make sure that you're feeling them and staying away from your lower back. It'll also give you more time to think about, especially when you're past the knee, to make sure that it's your legs doing the work and not your lower back. Another way to do it is actually adding a pause when you do touch the ground. But when you touch the ground, you just barely touch the ground. You hold that tension as much as you can. And then you do everything we've talked about. You push against the ground a little bit, bar is still headed towards you. You make sure your hamstrings are coming towards each other as your glutes come forward because you're making that space between your torso and your legs so you can get those hips through. So it'll look something like this. Take that breath, hooking, long neck, going, tight belly, on the floor, take my time, and then I come back up. Now, Josh, you were talking about how the RDL can be a lower back exercise. And in fact, when I do RDLs, I'm 90% concerned with using my hamstrings and glutes and 10% wanting to put my lower back in a flexed position, in a rounded position. Now, if that makes you nervous, that's perfectly acceptable. You do not have to try to go beyond your natural range of motion in your hamstrings. In fact, most people, they should focus on just hamstrings and glutes, getting to about their maximum stretch, coming up, and that's as far as they want to go. But for someone like me, I spend so much time in an extended position that I don't get a whole lot of flexion position. So I'm just trying to balance some things out. And the way I do that is actually taking this RDL up a notch. Now, for those of you that are extremely flexible, you might be able to add 2 or 3 inches under your feet, like I'm about to show you, and still keep a perfectly flat back, and that's awesome. If you want to add that flexion to your spine, you certainly can go a little bit higher. And again, it really just comes down to building up your tolerances. Your first day, you don't put a 10-inch box and put your max deadlift on, just barely pick it up and snap your back in half. No, you start with 2 inches, next time maybe 3 inches, a little bit higher, maybe a little bit more weight, and you slowly progress. And maybe in a year, you have that 8-inch box with 100 pounds over your normal RDL, and you're really adding some flexion to your back. That's typically called the Jefferson curl. So I'm going to get my deficit board out and show you how we can take even a lighter weight, especially if your gym doesn't have a lot of weight, or let's say dumbbells, you're really flexible and you can touch the ground, how you can make things harder. So you don't need a fancy board. I'm standing on about a 3-inch board here. What you do need is something flat. A gym I used to work at had these plastic risers that you could stack on each other, and those were pretty safe. Some of those are only rated for a couple 100 pounds, so just be careful. If you weigh 130 pounds and you're doing RDLs with 130 pounds, you might be maxing out those boxes, so just be careful. If you have plates available to you that are very, very flat, okay, maybe you could make a case that you could use those, especially if they're competition grade plates. They tend to be pretty flat. If they have a divot in them, just be very, very careful. If you're using a rubber plate, so a bumper plate, sometimes flipping them over can make them more flat, but keep in mind, lighter weights that might be more flat might cave in on you because they are lighter weights and there's less substance there. So anyway, we're going to do a deficit RDL. Again, for me, you're going to see my lower back round because that's how I want to do them. If I were more flexible, you'd see a perfect flat back and me going down, trying to maximize those hamstrings. But again, this is a way to make a lighter weight harder for someone like me. So everything still applies. I'm trying to pull that bar behind me. Long neck. I'm going to find that hamstring tension by hooking my feet. I'm going to take that big balloon breath. Bend, long neck, stretch, 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 touch the floor, come back up. If I didn't want to touch the floor, but still maximize my stretch, I might come to here. It's still lower than it would be if I was on the floor, still benefiting my hamstrings, but take it to the floor and come back up. Things to note, I'm doing as best of a job as I can of keeping that bar really close to me. Again, you guys wouldn't be talking. You guys would be imagining you have that balloon, you're trying to breathe air into it without actually opening your mouth. You're going to stay as tight as possible. Ways to make the RDL a little bit easier for you. So we've talked about tempo, which would make it harder. We've talked about adding more height, more range of motion to it, makes it harder. But ways to actually make it easier. If you need a little bit more core pressure, and what is core pressure going to do but help us lift more weight, you could certainly use a belt. But I caution you, if you're using a belt on your RDLs, I expect that your back is not the reason you're putting the belt on. If even with the basic hinge, if you're feeling your lower back, you need to fix that. There's a problem with how you're perceiving this RDL that's causing you to use your lower back a lot. And a belt isn't going to fix a technique problem. What the belt is going to do is help increase that pressure you get from thinking about that balloon cue. If you haven't seen that, go back to the bracing portion of this video. Because you put the belt on just a little bit tighter than what you just have on normally, right? It's just about an inch in more than you just standing there with it just on soft. That way, when you breathe, there's a little bit of pressure. You take the same breathing, everything is the same. And again, it could add more weight, or at least it could just add some comfort to the lift itself. Again, if as you're tipping over, you feel a burning sensation in one of your hips, if your lower back is burning, your knees, whatever, this is not going to fix that problem. It could only make things worse. But for most people, I highly recommend using straps. And you can use any type of straps you really want as long as you're not crazy with the weight selections that you're doing. They're extremely good at making sure that that bar stays nice and tight in your hand. So I love using straps for my accessory works. I love using straps on everything, really, because it allows me to have this double overhand. But more importantly on the RDL is if you feel that that bar is starting to slip in your hand a little bit, your body will try to catch that weight. And so again, if it slips a little, you're going to round your body trying to hook your hands. And all it takes is just a little bit in your hands. Your body perceives that as you're losing your strength. and that's just not great, right? So again, straps, one time around is really all you need, right? It goes toward the thumb, one time around, you grab onto it. That can really help lower back pain. That can really help you hold on to more weights to do 2 more reps, 3 more reps, whatever. This isn't an exercise, in my opinion, to try to train your grip strength. This is an exercise to train everything but your grip strength, right? Your glutes, your hamstrings, your lower back, your core, your upper back, your mid back, everything, right? So again, straps, there's no shame in using straps. Please, if your gym allows you to use it, use chalk. If they don't like powder, use a liquid chalk. A chalk can really help add 5 to 10 pounds to your lifts as well, just because if your hands are a little humid, a little bit wet, it's hard to hold on to that bar. So you want them dry. Using chalk and straps is my preferred way of doing it, because again, the last thing I want is to be limited on an RDL by my hand. So there you have it, guys. We did one of my favorite hamstrings, glutes, and lower back exercises, the RDL. You guys know how to brace better. You guys know how to hinge better. You know how to use dumbbells. And if today was your first day doing it, stick with your dumbbells. In a few weeks, maybe you go to the barbell. Once the barbell starts to get easier, maybe you do that deficit RDL that we were talking about. If, again, that bar is starting to slip in your hands, maybe using straps or especially chalk could be very beneficial to you. If you are feeling your lower back, make sure you guys are checking yourself out from the side, because you may be getting some spinal flexion going on. Sometimes that can be appropriate, but it also makes you feel your lower back extra, just like we talked about. If you guys have any questions about your form, please feel free to video that technique and send it over to me on Instagram at Garage Gang Gyms, and I will gladly show you and talk to you by doing a voiceover of how you guys can improve your technique. If you guys like deep dive videos like this, please like and subscribe to my channel. I try to release a video every week, whether it's a review or it's a deep dive like this one is here. My name is Coach Josh with Garage Gang Gyms, and I'll see you guys next time.